Welcome, Redditors, and this is Contemporary Ethics and Foundations of Decision Theory, a University of Reddit seminar over the summer. And just for those of you who might be interested in contemporary ethics, but also interested in other sorts of ethics, this is actually going to be a very specific kind of class, right? So we're going to focus on very recent research in ethical theory post-20th century, right? But there's also another class starting in the fall on University of Reddit, I think called What Does It Mean to Live Well? And the syllabus for that seems to include a lot of, a very wide range of research in ethics, including Eastern philosophy. So if you're interested, a more general approach, that's going to be available also on Reddit in the fall. And so let's get started. You may notice here there's a bunch of faces that may or may not be associated with this seminar. In fact, that's a complete lie. They just are not associated with the seminar at all. But the reason I post them here is because I sort of want to give those sort of people new to philosophy again an idea that professional philosophy is alive and well these days, right? So if you're trying to go into it, you're not sure, it's a big field. These sort of six people here are sort of the mainstays of the ethics portion of the NYU philosophy faculty. These three guys in particular right here are really, really, really big deals, and they get paid an extensive amount of money for their work. And this is Peter Younger and Derek Parfit and Thomas Nagel. Some of you may have read their work in other fields like perception or personal identity and desire and psychology and stuff like that. And so they get around, they do a lot of stuff. So as a philosopher, you don't have to stick to one thing. You can branch out into different fields and apply work and all sorts of things, if you're into that. But in any case, let's get started, right? So who's this guy? This is G.E. Moore. He is he's sort of the founder of contemporary philosophy in a way. Wrote this book, Principia Ethica, in 1903, and this is sort of a very pretty foundational quote as to how analytic philosophy got kick-started. In ethics, as in all other philosophical studies, the difficulties and disagreements of which history is full are mainly due to a very simple cause, namely to the attempt to answer questions without first discovering precisely what question it is that you desire to answer. So he's saying that all the issues of philosophy in the past was just mostly kindled by people just not getting the concepts clear at the beginning of the discussion, right? They should have defined their terms, said what the necessary and sufficient conditions for them were, and proceeded further that way. That would have cleared a lot of things up. So, in our case, we're going to try to do that. And that's why this first section of the course is kind of important, right? The meaning of ethical terms is going to matter a lot to whether or not they're true or false. So whether good or bad are important things in your life has a lot to do with what good or bad mean, right? And so the two kinds of sentences we're going to be very interested in, although there are many we're going to discuss later, are descriptive sentences and evaluative sentences. And you'll notice I've underlined all of this descriptive sentence because all there is really to a descriptive sentence is for it to be a proposition, right? And a proposition is just something that can be true or false. So from now on in this whole PowerPoint and continuously, I'm going to underline the sorts of things, the important things that can be true or false. These are propositions, right? But propositions in this sort of form, you have gotten karma for that post, appear kind of rarely, actually. It's not always the case that proposition stuff appears like this. Usually what happens is sentences will have propositional content. They'll have sort of fragments that can be true or false, right? You have gotten karma for that post is a part of this sentence, but this whole sentence here, this evaluative sentence, is you should have gotten karma for that post. Is you should have gotten karma for that post a proposition? Is it the kind of thing that can be true or false? We don't know as ethicists yet, right? But first, before we set out on figuring that out, right, we should try to figure out, what kind of question we're interested in. Certainly our question is going to have to do with the word should, right? And I've sort of taken the liberty of coloring in all the evaluative terms like should, better, good, etc. red, so they're very clear. And so a question we might ask about this is it true that you should have gotten karma for that post, right? And I've sort of bracketed things here, try to make it clear what sentence is going where. What kind of question would this be? This is sort of a value-laden question. It's sort of a question like, is the death penalty okay? Is it better to have more abortions or less? Is it good to have progressive Christians, etc.? These kinds of questions are questions that a specific type of ethicist is interested in. A normative ethicist is interested in these kinds of questions, right? They're interested in value-laden questions. Whereas for the first part of this course, we're going to be interested in questions like this. Is it true that you should have gotten karma for that post means I would like it if you had gotten karma for that post, right? If it does mean that, and you'll see that the below is underlined, then it's a proposition, right? Because the below sentence can be true or false. So you should have gotten karma for that post can be true or false. It's descriptive. And that's what's called a reduction of a sentence. We'll talk more about that later. But that's a meta-ethical question. Whatever the answer is to that question, we know it's a meta-ethical question because it's a question that asks something descriptive. It asks something about linguistics, about meanings. It doesn't ask anything about values. We don't care about what your values are when we try to figure out whether something means something else, right? And so here are examples of different sorts of sentences like that. They're descriptive sentences, all of which are propositions and underlined here, you'll notice. And there are imperatives, commands, and interrogative statements or sentences. And there are evaluative sentences. These are the sort of more very ambiguous kinds of sentences. It's not clear whether these sentences can be broken down into imperatives or whether they're really descriptions or whether, they're even, I mean, it's sort of clear that they're not questions, right? But maybe they can be a question. Maybe I can ask something like, strangeness is good? I don't know. But we don't have very good equipment right now in terms of these categories for dealing with these kinds of sentences. We don't know where they belong. And so Searle is this popular philosopher you may know of from his various thought experiments. And you can pause this and read his quote. I won't read it because it's very long. But he's a very famous philosopher at UC Berkeley. And he noticed that he'd said that, this results just from a mistake in the categorization of sentences. People are misunderstanding what really the basic elements of languages are. Really, the basic elements of language aren't sentences. They're speech acts. They're the instances in which you utter sentences. That's what matters. Whether something is a question or whether it's a command doesn't have to do with the punctuation marks you put on it. It has to do with what it sounds like when you say it, or what context you say it in, etc., etc. So I'm going to use this dog to try to illustrate an important point about illocutionary acts, right? So, so there are a couple of propositions I could make about this dog, right? So I might say something like, this dog has long hair. That's a proposition. It's true or false. Either the dog has long hair or it doesn't, right? But saying this dog has long hair is not the same thing as saying this dog has long hair, right? It has the same exact propositional content. I'm using the same exact words, but the meaning of the sentence is different because I'm performing a different speech act, right? And so this was Searle's important point. Actions like this dog has long hair, or this dog has long hair, or this dog has long hair, right? Those are three different kinds of speech acts. The last one was me sort of trying to persuade you to believe something, almost compelling you to believe it by pointing at you threateningly, saying, if you don't believe this, I'm going to hit you in the face. You better believe this, right? That's a command, right? And so Searle thinks, and pretty much everyone else nowadays thinks, that you can take any proposition or any sentence you want and turn it into any other kind of sentence by using illocutionary force. Um, if I'm at a strip club, right, and I ask you what the time is or something in a sly way, that's very different from me asking a friend at work what the time is, right? I have a different kind of intention just by being at the strip club. Even if I say everything the exact same way, even if I just casually say, do you have the time? I might say that the exact same way in the setting of a strip club or in the workplace setting, but the meaning of what I'm saying is completely different. Yeah, so that was me being silly, but to just simplify all that, so not all there is to an illocutionary act is the thing that you're uttering. Right? It's not just the locution, it's also the intent behind the locution that makes it an illocutionary act. And that is represented by F, right? F is the thing that's giving the illocutionary force onto P, right? And you can think of that in terms of like a function. You could think of this as F of P, right? P is going in and F of P is coming out, and this is a speech act, a brand new thing. It's really not a function. The way Searle defines it is not functional, but I think that's a decent analogy for understanding it, and we'll use that later. But so here are some examples of operators, right? So the force here, A, is assertoric force, and that's just a fancy word for saying that something is true, literally saying P. That's what happens when you utter A of P, rather. I assert that P is the case. That's what's going on. Notice I don't underline this, because really what I'm doing is an action, right? This isn't a proposition. This isn't like a sentence in English. This is something that's happening. I declare war on Europe right now. And so here are some other speech acts, and the most relevant one that's going to be talked about here is the sort of desire expression speech act, the expression of desire, D of P, right? I've called that. That's not, I don't know if anybody else calls it that, but I've decided to be simple here, and that just means woohoo or yay P, right? Or something like that, right? That just means that I desire that P is true. I want it to be the case that P. So our question here, our first sectional question, is going to be, what about, it should be that P, or P is good, right? Are these illocutions? And if they are, which ones? Are these reflecting a desire that P is, it should be that P saying woohoo P? Or is it really saying I assert that P? Am I really saying there are certain properties that this proposition has? And I call, it should be that P, SP here, to try to make it clear that I'm using a particular evaluative term on a proposition, and to try to distinguish the propositional content from the evaluative content. Why? Because we're not sure whether the evaluative content is propositional. We're not sure whether SP is a proposition or not, right? And we're going to try to figure that out right now. So here are two people arguing about that. They're arguing about specifically P equals you get karma for that post, right? That's a proposition. That can be true or false. And both of them are arguing about whether it should be the case that you get karma for that post is true or false. It's SP. They're arguing about that sentence. And so this guy, A.J. Ayer, is saying D of P is really what everyone is saying when they say SP. They are usually expressing a desire they have for P being true, right? He thinks that really SP is not a proposition. It's not something that could be true or false. It's just an expression of a desire. And this guy over here, G.E. Moore, who you learned about earlier, is saying, no, you got it all wrong. A of SP is what everyone is saying when they utter SP. They're just saying SP. They're saying it's true that it should be the case that you get karma for that post. You getting karma for that post has certain value independent of my desires, etc., etc. So he's saying they believe SP, and he's saying, no, they don't believe SP. SP is not a belief. It's just sort of a placeholder that expresses that to other people that they have certain desires, right? And so this segues into, a small topic that we're going to cover here, which is the Frege-Geach problem. And sort of, you don't have to understand this part. I'm just sort of introducing this as sort of a semantics problem, so you can see sort of the methods that ethicists use. But that won't be happening until the next video, because I totally ran out of time on this one. But before this video ends, and actually you could just go back and pause that video at the end there if you want to try to figure out the problem yourself. But in any case, I wanted to say that this book, Metaethics After More by Terry Horgan and Mark Timmons, is going to be available as supplementary material for those of you that are sort of more interested in the symbolic logic / semantics side of the course. And for those of you that aren't, I don't want you to think that all this, the symbol stuff, introduction, is really going to be that heavy at all. Really, the main text doesn't really have a lot of this technical linguistic stuff. It's just I wanted to get us primed for the first chapters or so by discussing sort of the background theory behind all these semantic theories of ethics. And sorry for all the terrible editing. I had to stitch this together really quickly. But yeah, see you next time.